Joining me now is Ann-Louise Hittle. She is the Vice President for Macro Oils with WoodMacKenzie. Thanks so much for taking the time. The energy dialogue here, looking at the outlooks and really comparing them. How relevant and how important is this for you?
For us, it's very important. We rely on IEA data for historical data. We rely on OPEC analysis in order to get an idea of their thoughts on future supply. And then to see the comparison between the two, it helps us as an industry and as consultants start to get a better understanding of the future. So it's good to see how they compare, and also to see how the difference between the base, because they do have different bases, and it's helped to see that explained.
Now, you've attended many of the symposiums before. This one, it feels a lot bigger, and again, we're looking at this, it's a very international feel of this today. We see people from right around the world, and also tremendous diversity in terms of who, from government ministers right across the board, companies here. Talk to me a little bit about the people you've been chatting to and the feeling you're getting.
Well, it is. The one thing that struck me about the event was the diversity of attendees, because we have even academics, we have think tanks, we've got the industry here, a range of industry representatives too, not just the majors, but some different operators in the company, storage companies, for example. Then we've got consultants, and then we of course have representatives from NOCs and oil ministers. For example, you mentioned the oil minister from Sudan. So all of that contributes to a point of view. And then today we had a presentation on solar power in China, which I found very interesting just to get that perspective. And he focused in on the buildup of solar power in the Middle East, and in particular in Saudi Arabia. So I found that useful to get that perspective too.
Where do you see the role of the International Energy Forum in bringing everybody together?
Well, I think the role, and this was enunciated to me when I was preparing for my talk, was to try and bring producers and consumers together, and also to prepare for the future. We're talking about peak oil demand. When will the timing be? And I, for example, in my talk raised the issue of, if we're all preparing for peak oil demand, will there actually be enough supply by 2035? It does set up that as a potential challenge, even at this time of ample supply. So what the IEF does is it enables us to raise these questions and compare views and think about longer term issues in the industry. What does that lead to? Potentially less volatility, maybe avoiding a boom-bust cycle or a spike in oil prices, which only destabilizes economies and creates other issues that we might want to try and avoid.
Now, in your career in this industry, have you seen a better cooperation actually beginning to be the norm, rather than when you compare it perhaps to many years ago?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, to see the IEA and OPEC Secretariat in the same event, working together, comparing their outlooks. And I've talked to people here, and they've talked about how 10 years ago that wasn't really even possible before we had the IEF. So the IEF itself has helped generate conversation between consumers and producers. One other thing that really stood out to me is when the Saudi oil minister Al-Fallah showed up, because he said overtly to us in the audience and then the participants in the group, in the room, that the reason why he was there to show Saudi commitment to the IEF and to producer-consumer dialogue and to predictability in the market and in the industry in the future.
Now, also the Capstock Roundtable, that was again part of this. It was on the second day. Tell me a little bit about the discussions that went on there, and you of course had a presentation at that thought leadership, and the role of Capstock too in terms of the research institute here really growing and really coming into its own, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And the Capstock group put together very good presentations, because we had 10 minutes each and then room for discussion, and it was a lively discussion. You've got these people together in the room, and we were all able to air different views. There was a discussion about demand forecasts. Are they wrong in the short term? Do we get them too low or too high in the long term? What are the risks to demand, short, medium, and long term? Very lively discussion, I must admit. And then we're also going to be looking at supply and some other issues. So Capstock is helping to create this slightly more casual event from the big IEF event on the day before. It's a little bit smaller group, slightly smaller. It's shorter, it's for 3 hours, and we are able to tackle some of the issues that were raised yesterday and discuss them further and further questions and answers.
And just very quickly, looking at the bigger oil picture, we're seeing a bit of stability come back in the market, hopefully a bit more demand come back. Are we at a position, we're not quite in balance in the market yet, but where do you see the position right now when we look at the general oil environment?
Well, if there's one thing that came through in the past day and a half, it is the role of OPEC, and the OPEC is back idea. So let's just say OPEC continues its rollover through the end of the year. Then we would see a rebalancing start to happen in the second half of this year. We're showing implied stock draws in both the third and fourth quarter of 2017 if OPEC rolls over their agreement. Compliance has been good. Roll it over at their May meeting and keep that through the end of the year, and we will start to see significant rebalancing as well as higher prices and put pressure on that prompt barrel. Because when you have a stock drawdown, which is what our outlook is showing, then there's going to be a pressure on the premium barrel to incentivize bringing the oil out of storage. When we look to 2018, assuming that OPEC does not roll over in the agreement and that they back off from production constraint, then it could start to get a little bit sloppy again in the supply and demand outlook in terms of the balance. And a lot of that is because of the recovery in U.S. tight oil production. But that only gets us so long. And that's one of the things we were discussing this year is what happens today, what happens in the longer term in terms of supply and demand, and can we really rely on U.S. tight oil to resolve future demand?
But there's you're seeing a better stability if they stay with it and actually roll over.
Yeah, if they roll over, they'll definitely be in our outlook in any case. Assuming there's no major quick recession, we're looking for a tighter market in the second half of this year.